Hi everyone, thanks for joining us. My name is Laura Laing. I work at 2D Securities running client management in Europe. From a diversity and inclusion perspective, at 2DS I co-lead our LGBTQ2+ pillar as well as our mental health awareness stream. Over the last year and a half to 2 years, I've been part of the Interbank committee. For those watching that don't know, the Interbank Forum was formed in 2002 and is a network of LGBTQ2+ networks from the financial services industry. Interbank strives to help create an open and inclusive space for LGBTQ2+ employees from financial services firms. It gives them an opportunity to meet and discuss what impacts them in their day-to-day work environment. It's a place where the members can share best practices, collaboratively explore solutions or responses to issues that benefit the financial services industry, including showing their commitment to LGBTQ2+ communities. Of course, Interbank also provides networking opportunities for those employees as well. With that, let me tell you what we're doing today. On behalf of Interbank and in support of Transgender Day of Remembrance, which is on the 20th of November, we're lucky enough to have Eli Moore with us. Hi, Eli.
Hi, thank you for having me on
No,
and this amazing educational opportunity.
no problem. Any opportunity to do that is obviously extremely important. So Eli identifies as a trans man and his pronouns are he and him. Eli worked for many years with Space Youth Project, an LGBTQ2+ charity that helps educate and raise awareness in schools in Dorset. He's extremely active in raising awareness in the trans community, and he recently helped with an LGBTQ2+ book, which helps educate children and young adults. Eli is also my brother. As I mentioned, we're here today in support of Transgender Day of Remembrance. The week leading up to this day is usually used to raise awareness for the transgender community. So Eli has kindly offered to chat with me around his experiences, and we're extremely grateful. Before we start, I want to share some history around Trans Day of Remembrance. So Trans Day of Remembrance was started in 1999 by transgender advocate Gwendolyn Ann Smith as a vigil to honour the memory of Rita Hester, a transgender woman who was killed in 1998. The vigil commemorated all the transgender people lost to violence since Rita Hester's death and began an important tradition that has become the annual Transgender Day of Remembrance. A quote from Gwendolyn was, "Transgender Day of Remembrance seeks to highlight the losses we face due to anti-transgender bigotry and violence. On no stranger to the need to fight for our rights, and the right to simply exist is first and foremost. With so many seeking to erase transgender people, sometimes in the most brutal ways possible, it is vitally important that those we lose are remembered and that we continue to fight for justice." Eli, thank you again for your willingness to answer some questions for us. And I'm going to kick off with, what does Transgender Day of Remembrance and Trans Awareness Week mean to you?
I think it's really important that we still have this conversation surrounding rights for transgender people, and I think nothing highlights that more than Trans Day of Remembrance. The fact that we gather every year and mourning over 300 lives lost just in 1 year alone, and that's with only data that we can actually get a hold of, so that's not necessarily the actual number, it's just a drop in the water. And the founder of Trans Day of Remembrance, the tagline very much is "Mourn for those lost, fight like hell for the living." And I think that's very important, is that we need to remember that although we've come very, very far, we still have a lot more to go.
Absolutely. Thank you. So do you think there's a typical trend or reaction that trans people experience when coming out, both from members of the community, the LGBTQ2+ community, and outside of it?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of misinformation being spread around trans identity that does highly impact people's responses to you coming out. Specifically, media in the UK reporting on trans issues is very transphobic, and that does influence a lot of people, including like my nan even got influenced by it and worried about that when I came out, and was convinced that it was a phase. And that's something that comes up quite a lot, is people are really scared that I've made a mistake and that I have gone through a very intense and possibly irreversible process, only to at the end of it decide that actually no, I want to detransition. And also there is quite rampant homophobia in the LGBTQ plus community, very sadly, and that has highly increased in the UK with trans exclusive radical feminists, and it is influencing politics and getting into the House of Parliament as well. So that's quite worrying in the UK at the moment.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. And can you share some of the challenges you personally experienced when you were coming out, or that you've experienced since?
Yeah. So I was really lucky when I came out that I had my family support me, and I know really sadly that that is quite an odd occurrence to have a supportive family. And I understand that it was a transitional process for all of us, and I think a lot of people forget that if you know someone coming out, you are not at the same place as them. So when I came out, I had a whole year to process, socially transition without my family knowing, and I was at the process where I was ready to be Eli. I was ready to have he, him pronouns. And I was really quite frustrated at my family for not instantly respecting this. And it took me a while to realize that it was a transitional period for all of us involved, and that my family did have to slightly mourn what they had lost, but also for them to learn that they hadn't lost me. I was how I always was. I just genuinely just had a new name and pronouns and was on a different track than I was before. Sadly, not all experiences have been so helpful or accepting. So by the time I came out, I was in college, and I was doing an art course. And sadly, I did get bullied for coming out on the course, and it did lead to me dropping out of college and becoming a neat young person. And it really did affect my mental health quite a lot. And I relapsed into self-harming, and it did get to a point where I did attempt suicide just because it was really overwhelming. And that bullying and the hate crimes from that was really internalized. I internalized all of it, and I thought that I deserved to feel that way because I was queer and because I was trans, because it's just so normalized.
Thank you. Obviously, really appreciate you being so honest. I was obviously a part of that, a part of your coming out, and as much as being in the LGBTQ2 plus community myself, I think I always thought that something like that would be so easy for me. Like I had to come out, but it's such a different experience, and for you, and also for the family when we watch our parents go through and try and process, and also our grandparents, as you say,
Yeah.
and. I do remember exactly that, mourning a loss there, and but also trying to appreciate the gain. And I love that you are happy to be so open. And I know sometimes I ask you things that perhaps I shouldn't ask, but luckily we are family, and I do have that. Um, and I think us doing this today is so important because people watching this know that it is difficult no matter how supportive. So yeah, I really appreciate your honesty. Obviously, we know that it was a tough time, and I'm so happy that you've come so far. As you said, there's still loads for us to do, but it's super important. So the next question that we've got to ask you really is, how do you think Trans Awareness Week and Transgender Remembrance helps tackle transphobia?
I think allowing the platform for actual trans people to talk about the challenges that comes with being trans in the UK is really vital, because we rarely get that platform. So to be able to uphold other trans people in the community and allow them to actually have a voice, even for a week or a day, does highly impact it. And as long as it's reaching at least one person who's thinking, okay, that's cool, maybe that's me in the future, or maybe that's me now, and I just need to be aware that there is a community out there. Although we're a mourning community, we are a very active community, and we are coming together to help each other get through this day, because it is really rough for all of us. I'm planning an event in Bournemouth where we hold a candlelight vigil every year in the Triangle. And we do get a lot of people passing by who stay for the whole event just because they're so touched by the actual event. And that wouldn't happen if we didn't have days like that.
Thank you. Thanks so for doing, being so good and active in the community. We definitely need more people doing the kind of thing that you do. What do you think needs to be done to help raise awareness of the community and address discrimination? I guess we kind of covered that a little bit, but if you can think of anything else that maybe we could do.
I think it's just putting more policies in place that stop such transphobic media, because it is getting quite bad in the UK, even from quite previously very respectful like news outlets have even been like influenced by transphobia, and it's very alienating in the UK to read the news because a lot of the time it's people debating whether or not you have a right to live and you have a right to live happy or sad. So I think that is one of the biggest challenges facing trans people today, as well as more education in schools, because there still are quite a lot of young trans people struggling to come out, struggling to find themselves because they don't have access to information, which was very much the same for me. I didn't come out until I was 16 because I didn't know that I could be a trans man, that something such as a trans man existed. I thought there were only trans females, so it was quite liberating for me to be able to have access to that information. And that's also why I helped on the LGBT education book, because it is really vital that young people have open access to this safe information.
Yeah, absolutely. You know what? That's something I wasn't aware of. I didn't know that you didn't know that there was a possibility there. So that's, even I learn, even though we've, been through a journey as a family. I think that's very interesting to know. And definitely with my children, we will educate them more. I think actually just circling back to a question we spoke about earlier, we've seen a lot when we've been doing research as part of the networks. You read a lot of hate crimes that happen with, in the transgender community, also in the LGBTQ2 plus community. But I think one of the biggest things that is surprising is that the trans community seems to sometimes get quite a lot of negative responses from people in the community as well, from the L, the G.
Yeah.
I know there's a lot of bisexual discrimination as well from people in the community. Have you experienced much of that, or your friends?
So obviously I try to keep myself in very safe spaces, and I like
Sure.
to very much work in spaces where we don't where we accept everyone no matter their identity. And I think that's really important that us as a community do that. But I have faced like problems from gay men and lesbians hitting on me and then being really offended that I identified as male, and that I wasn't like a butch lesbian that they were trying to hit on. And same with gay men, because they're so offended that I might have different genitals, like especially dating. So like going on stuff like Tinder and Grindr, it was a lot of transphobia and a lot of really intrusive questions from people I didn't even know.
Okay, thank you. Thanks again for being open. I just find it so interesting. You when we talk about allyship, we talk about allyship a lot every single day in my internal work network, and everywhere else too. And you need to be an ally like holistically. You can't just say, well, I'm an ally to I'm a heterosexual person, I'm an ally to just lesbians or whatever. It's very interesting. So I appreciate that.
I think intersectionality within our allyship is very important, because these are my experiences as a fat trans man. I have very different experiences from a person of color or a disabled person. So
yeah, thank you. Okay, so can you think of ways that the best ways that people can help support the trans community? Obviously doing things like this, I hope, is one thing, but is there anything else you can think of that we can take back to our internal networks and sort of try and push?
I think it's really important to pay attention to what trans people are actually saying and what they're actually asking for, because a lot of the time it is just respect for name and pronouns. A lot of people aren't asking any more than that. And I personally don't ask for any more than that. I just want to be called Eli and I want he, him pronouns. And that's kind of obviously, that's just the baseline for respect of each other as human beings, but that's something we just don't get. So I think it's really important that you just learn to respect people and respect when they are willing to answer questions and respect when they aren't. And also just kind of learn to recognize when transphobia is showing up, because it is really normalized and we need more cis people to challenge it on our behalf, because it shouldn't always come down to trans people. Obviously, it's really hard for us to consistently fight for our lives every day. So if there are cis people who can step in and do that for us, even just for like, you know, just overhearing someone say a slur and just going, sorry, can you not use that language? It is very simple. So yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, the last question that we have for you, hopefully, is a more positive note. Are there any trans public figures or role models that inspire you? That's the first part of this question.
I still think there's a lot of issues in representation in media. It is showcasing a very palatable kind of trans person that passes really well, so looks like the gender they identify as, and kind of very much fit into cis normative standards. And I think for me, as someone who majority of my life have not fit into those standards, it's really hard for me to say I have a role model who is trans, who is, you know, really well known. But I have a lot, I'm an artist, so I have a lot of artists that I look up to, one being Jeffrey Chung, who is a trans man of color, doing everything he can within his artwork to make the skateboarding community in America inclusive. And I really love that. I love these tons of people who are working within their local community, rather than standing up in front of a nation and being a role model, but rather on the ground level more.
Awesome, I love that. And the last thing then, which is kind of relates back to that, so maybe you don't, but do you see much trans representation in sort of films, TVs, or books which you find relatable?
I solely seek out LGBT books written by LGBT people. So in my bookshelf, there are tons of books. Currently reading one about Lou Sullivan, who was a trans man living with HIV, and he was the first medically recognized gay trans man. Because previously you weren't able to like medically transition unless you were heterosexual. You identified as heterosexual. So gay trans men weren't really a thing. No one believed it existed until him. So it's gorgeous to like read through like his personal diaries he kept throughout his life. And yeah, there's tons of amazing trans authors that are really, really good, and podcasts as well. Just any media that comes from a trans person, I think is vital.
Amazing. Well, thank you, Eli. We really appreciate how open and honest you've been, and obviously your time as well. So yeah, just thanks.
Cool. Thank you so much for having me, in fact, giving me this opportunity.
No worries. I will end it there. Thanks.
Cool. Awesome.